Welcome to Ironsworn, Rime and the Frostmaiden. This is episode 16. Before we start this episode, I want to talk about an important tool in your toolkit as a GM, which is that you get to control time. So you get to decide, do you want the pacing to be second by second or minute by minute or hour by hour? Do you even care to cover things, or do you just want to story over some bits of the adventure that aren't particularly dramatic, or maybe they're not particularly relevant for your characters? So for this episode, I was originally going to design a journey for Karl and Haf and Tessa from Caer all the way across the Dale back to Tourmaline and Lonelywood, but those aren't components in the module as written. So since my goal with this series is to focus on what's in the book and to share that with you, I decided to gloss over that. So I'm not going to roll any dice for it. I'm not going to do any moves. We're just going to get Karl and Haf and Tessa to Lonelywood. Now, there are some mechanical consequences to that, which we'll talk about in a second. To recap the game, Karl and Haf have been chasing all over 10 towns trying to find their sisters. They finally discovered that the two of them had hired a mountaineer named Garrett. The mountaineer was hired to take them up the big mountain in the middle of Icewind Dale, Kelvin's Cairn. So they went along the road, along the different towns to Kelvin's Cairn, finally went up it, found the mountaineer and found Tessa, but did not find Bridget. They subsequently discovered that there were some prisoners that were taken by some dwarves near the base of Kelvin's Cairn, and they do have a note written in Dwarvish, which they still need to get translated. They got to find a dwarf somewhere. Now they've got Tessa. They have a bit of a lead in that they know that the dwarves took Bridget somewhere, but they're not quite sure where. So Karl and Haf are going to escort Tessa back home. The mechanical consequences of skipping over any adventure that they have trying to get back home is that we have a couple of quests that we need to resolve. The first is that we wanted to tell the dwarves about what's happening in Caer Dineval. So we're going to mark progress on that and try to resolve that quest. So the dwarves are happy with that information and give us what we need. Karl does ask if they're willing to translate the note, but the dwarves are too busy. They don't really want to deal with it right now. So we get to mark 1 experience for the strong hit on that troublesome quest. We're also returning Tessa to Lonelywood, so we're going to mark progress on that. Since I didn't do any moves, I'm not going to mark as much progress. If I had played out that whole journey, then I'd probably be marking progress as we go, getting into trouble, etc. But since we didn't, I'm not going to mark it fully. So there might be something more to this. We might not make this vow. Let's see. Karl gets a weak hit on that. I think we'll take it. It was a formidable vow, so we still earn 2 experience, but I think that there's, at this point, not anything more that I want to do with that. Maybe eventually we'll come back to it. There have been a couple of vows that Karl's gotten a weak hit on, and there's still a variety of looming problems out there in Icewind Dale, but he really is focused on finding his sister. Now that Karl has some experience, we got to spend some of this, because otherwise I think we're going to have a really hard time further on in these adventures. First thing we're going to do is Karl's been talking to a ton of people. He's been traveling around with Haf. I think all this is going to translate into him being a better person in terms of communicating with others, and in terms of his bravery. He's had to face a bunch of crazy challenges. So he's going to spend the experience to up his heart. I mentioned in the session 0, this is a modification that I'm making because D&D assumes that you're going to level up and makes the challenges progressively harder. Ironsworn really doesn't assume that. And if he's going to survive the later chapters of Icewind Dale, he's going to need to be tougher. We're going to mark off 10 experience and give him a +1 to his heart. Hopefully that'll make some things easier. He still has some experience left over, and I think that I want to spend that to make him a little bit tougher. We're going to do that by upping kindred with Haf here. So he and Haf have been in a lot of battles. They've learned to work together. He's going to take this asset where he's going to get a +1 when he's fighting alongside Haf, which will help him in battle. He's also going to add to his Wayfinder here. He's going to take this asset when you secure an advantage or gather information by carefully surveying the landscape, which he is doing a lot of. And I think he's going to be a little more cautious about doing in the future if he's going to survive some of these tougher challenges. And he's going to hang on to that other 2 experience for future use. Maybe we'll have some opportunities to add a new asset. Karl and Haf have successfully delivered Tessa back home to Lonelywood. They check in with Nimsy, who's been worried sick this whole time. They've been out for weeks at this point. Tell her what's been going on and also give some information. So they've gotten some interesting pieces of information. It seems like the Rime of the Frostmaiden is being caused by Arl, which everybody knows, but they additionally got some details about how Arl is doing that. She has a power source that she's fueling the spell with, and she has a book that she's using. So that might become relevant down the line. They also discovered that the children of Arl, this cult that worships her, is gearing up for human sacrifice and may already be doing it. That's why Haf was taken by the White Moose, and that's why they suspect that Bridget and Tessa were taken, along with a bunch of other people from around 10 towns. It seems like they were somehow ensorcelled to follow some instructions. So they're going to head back out and try to figure out where Bridget may be. They've got to get this note translated, and really the best thing for that is probably going to be in Bryn Shander. It's the largest town, and there's a decent population of dwarves there. Karl and Haf head on out towards Bryn Shander. I'm not going to do any undertake the journeys for this because, again, it's not dramatic. It's not the interesting part of the adventure that I want to get to. So Karl and Haf roll into Bryn Shander a few days later. They head to the Northlook Inn and Tavern, where they had previously gotten some useful information, and they kind of chit chat with people, try to collect some information. So this is going to be a gather information. Haf is being charming and friendly. That gives us a bonus, but even still, we get a weak hit. We'll take a +1 momentum. We get information that complicates our mission. Just another gruesome day in 10 towns. Howling wind, bitter cold, and snowdrifts big enough to bury a herd of moose. But today, the local tavern is abuzz with news of a series of killings. Before the murders, the only question on everyone's mind was, will Summer ever return to Icewind Dale? Now the question is, will I be the killer's next victim? Nothing breeds fear and paranoia like a murderer with no face. 3 cold-blooded murders have been committed in the past month. A halfling trapper in Easthaven, a human shipbuilder in Targos, and 3 days ago, a dwarf glassblower in Bryn Shander. Each victim was found with a dagger of ice through the heart. What's the connection? The drunken lot huddled in the tavern offers no credible ideas, but sitting apart from them is an elderly shield dwarf with a nasty scar across her nose, who looks like she has something worth knowing. She's been smoking her pipe and eyeing you ever since you walked in. The dwarf gestures Karl and Haf over, and curious, they kind of head over and sit down and have a drink with her. She introduces herself as Hlyn Trollbane. She says she's retired, but she's heard of the murders, and the speakers aren't able to do anything or willing to do anything as far as she can tell. So she's kind of taken on herself to do a little bit of investigation about the murders. This is one of the opening quests that's available in the Rime of the Frostmaiden module. This is Cold-Hearted Killer. Sefik Caltro works for a small traveling merchant company called Torgs, owned and operated by a shady dwarf named Torga Icewind. In other words, Sefik gets around. He's charming, makes friends easily. He's also Torga's bodyguard, so I'm guessing he's good with a blade. Maybe, just maybe, Sefik is doing the Frostmaiden's work. Maybe he's doing human sacrifices. I followed Torgs for 10 days. It moved from town to town. Quite the devious little enterprise, but that's not my concern. What struck me is how comfortable Sefik Caltro looked in the cold weather. No coat, no scarf, no gloves. It was like the cold couldn't touch him. Kiss of the Frostmaiden, indeed. I would like for you to follow Torgs, find out what's happening with Sefik, and deal with him without the authorities. Karl's kind of taken aback by that, but he's got an idea. He kind of nods and he draws out the letter that he found in the dwarven stronghold, and he slides it across the table to Hlyn. He's like, I'm willing to do that. I've heard some bad things about Torgs. There was a death in Lonelywood that some people maybe attributed to him. But in return, could you translate this for us, please? And Hlyn opens the letter up. She's like, yes, it's very clearly a dwarven. It looks like a note from one fellow to another, saying that they're going to bring the latest captives down to Easthaven, to their stronghold there in the ferry, it sounds like. The ferry in Easthaven. Okay, well, I need to tell you, I am on a quest to find my sister. I've sworn an iron vow to find her, and I think that these dwarves have her. I think they're evil dwarves. And he describes what the Dorgar look like, and Hlyn nods and says, yes, those are Dorgar, all right. Evil, nasty folk. Not sure what they're doing up on the surface. Usually they're miles underground. Karl's like, well, I don't know about that, but I think they've taken my sister. I think they've taken her to Easthaven. I'm going to go to Easthaven. I will look for Torg's caravan. I swear a vow. And he holds onto his iron and swears it. And he knows what Hlyn wants, which is to kill this guy. It sounds like he's pretty bad. If he's part of the children of Arl, if he's involved in the human sacrifices, it sounds like there's probably no reasoning with him. So, and I don't think there's going to be enough evidence to bring him to justice. So we're just going to do some frontier justice on this. I think we're going to make this a dangerous quest. This is supposed to be the opening quest in the game when you're first level. So hopefully it's not too terribly dangerous. Getting this key piece of information, Karl and Haf do have a quick rest up in Bryn Shander, but then immediately hit the road and they have got to make their way to Easthaven. They traverse the tundra on this road. The east way is pretty well traveled between Bryn Shander and Easthaven. I think they make it without any major challenges. Karl and Haf get into town pretty late, so they're gonna just pull into the first inn they see, which is called the White Lady. It's a musty old inn, and there's a halfling there plucking along at a fiddle. As Karl and Haf come in, they introduce themselves, ask for lodgings. This fellow introduces himself as Ronaldo, and he's like, happy to give you lodgings if you'll attend our seance tonight. Karl and Haf look at each other like, okay, sure. If that'll help grease the wheels here. Ronaldo says, we live in dark times. Perhaps the spirit of the White Lady can help. Aren't you curious to hear what she has to say? And Karl shrugs like, okay. So they go into a back room in the White Lady here later that evening after recovering from their journey all the way from Bryn Shander. Smoke from burning incense clouds the room. Multicolored lamps and silks are hung from the rafters, and the light from several candles illuminate a circle of uncomfortable-looking guests sitting cross-legged on the floor. Ronaldo pushes back the sleeves of his robe, raises his hands, closes his eyes, and intones, "Lady who watches us from the lake, come to us in our darkest hour. Tell us what you've seen." After a moment of silence, thick frost forms on the inside of the room's windows, turning them opaque, and the candles go out one by one. Ronaldo says, "White Lady is close. I can feel her spirit. Call out to her, bring her in." Karl and Haf are going to say, "Oh, White Lady, we have questions that need answers." They don't know what to say at a seance. They've never been to a seance before. Give them a break. All right, this is going to be compel. Hey, first roll with Karl's new, stronger, higher heart stat. Doesn't matter because you got to miss. The spirit is not going to play nice with them. It shatters a window. Ronaldo lets out a little squeak, and the spirit disperses. Karl and Haf miss the opportunity to get any potential information they might have been able to from that ghost. Well, that's not the end of the world. They go back to their rooms and have a little bit of a rest. I did forget, we need to mark progress on finding his sister, because after they got that note translated, they know they needed to go to Easthaven. They needed to go to the ferry specifically. So they're going to get a rest before they check out the ferry, especially, if they think there are some of these dark dwarves there, they don't want to go at night when those guys probably have the advantage. Speaking of an advantage, I think that Karl is going to use one of his new assets, carefully survey the landscape ahead. That's going to give us a lot of good things. So we're going to get +2 momentum because of the strong hit, and then +1 because of our asset. And then we're also going to get a +1 on the next roll that we make as we are exploring this ferry. Easthaven's ferry, a keelboat, is trapped in the ice at the end of a wooden dock. A small cabin is situated towards the aft end of the hull. Karl knows that there are dark dwarves here, so he's going to go ahead and get his arrow ready that he knows can penetrate their armor using his Fletcher. Roll for that. So it doesn't say what to do if you just straight up miss. I think it's just ineffective. I think he doesn't get the arrow. I think he snaps off the arrowhead and he's not able to fix it in time. So that's not the best outcome. Karl and Haf get up onto the ferry. It's pretty obvious that the little cabin in the back is probably where anything is happening, but they're going to spend a moment to gather some information. A strong hit, lovely, will take +2 momentum and get specific helpful information, which I think that they see some footprints in the snow here that are consistent with the ones that we've seen before from the Durgar. That at least matches the information that they had from that letter. And I think that they realize that there's more than one of these dwarves. And we're going to go with kick the door in and shoot them. Karl sets up his bow, knocks the arrow, draws the string back, nods at Haf. Haf kicks the door in. Door opens onto this tiny building on the back of the keelboat, and there's no one here. Karl keeps his bowstring taut, walks in, looks around, and they don't spot anyone. They don't know it, but it's because the dwarf here is invisible. Karl and Haf aren't really here for dwarves anyways. They're here for Brigid. So they're going to explore the keelboat and see if they see any sign of Brigid. They already did their gather information, and they didn't see any evidence of any human footprints here, at least that haven't been here for a while. So that's a little alarming. This was their last lead. As they're exploring, though, they do see a map on one of the tabletops, and Karl and Haf kind of look over it curiously. It has notes on all of the 10 towns written in Dwarven, so they can't decipher it right now, but maybe this will be helpful. They roll it up, and as Karl starts to put it in his pocket, a dwarf emerges from the shadows, armed with a sharp, silvery dagger, and plunges it at Karl. There's just one of them right now, so I think we're going to make this guy dangerous. This is Dearth. As written, the map connects to the larger Dorgar plot, which I'm disregarding for the purposes of this series. Being ambushed, they are going to enter the fray. I think they are going to take the initiative, even though this dwarf came out of nowhere. Apparently, they are both a little bit on edge, so Karl draws back his arrow, almost reflexively fires it at this guy. This is a strike. Haf only helps on a clash or a battle or a face danger in combat. Strong hit on a strike gives us full harm as well as some extra harm. Nails this dwarf right in the center. The dwarf stumbles back. Karl gestures at Haf, get him, and fires off another arrow. And that's a miss with a match. As Haf starts to go towards the dwarf, Haf stumbles and falls. The dwarf jumps towards Karl, buries his dagger into Karl's chest. Karl grunts in pain, drops his bow and arrow, and he's just going to try to get this dwarf off of him. This is going to be a face danger with iron, and Haf gets up and is also trying to pull the dwarf off of Karl. This is the first time Haf is mechanically helping us in combat, which feels great. All right, they manage to get the dwarf. The dwarf pulls the dagger out of Karl, which is not good. In case you ever suffer a wound with a penetrating object, do not take it out. If you get shot by an arrow, leave it there. It's plugging important things. Karl is going to go ahead and take that as harm, endure harm. He manages to do that and press on. The dwarf now has them on the ropes. There's going to be a clash. As Haf was pulling this dwarf out, he pulls the dagger out of Karl, whips around, and sticks it straight into Haf. Haf gets grievously wounded, slowing down their momentum. This dwarf, they thought they had this all under control, but this dwarf has just become an absolute terror in melee. We're going to clash again. We got to do some damage to this guy. Karl manages to get his axe free, hits the dwarf on the back of the head. The dwarf's helmet rings, clearly a little bit concussed, but still fighting. Karl, a miss on his endure harm, is going to be wounded since his health is at 0 now. So they are going to go and try to turn the tide. The two of them, working together as they have many times before, are going to try to do a strike and gives us a strong hit, which means that we can try to end the fight. All right, on a weak hit, we succeed, but there's something else. I think the something else is that they hear some booted feet coming onto the ferry. It sounds like more dwarfs are coming. I think they got to bail. I don't think they want to throw down with some more dwarfs. So the two of them grab up the map, grab this guy, and they're going to hop out onto the ice away from the door and scamper off into darkness. Maybe. This is going to be a face danger. On a weak hit, they succeed, so they manage to get away before the other dwarves spot them, do lose some momentum, and they're going to interrogate this dwarf because they didn't find Bridget, and that's what Karl's doing here. So hopefully this dwarf knows something. They're going to take him away, far away from town, out on the ice, while it's still, thick enough to support their weight so that other people can't hear, and they're going to resuscitate this dwarf and ask him some questions. I'm not actually going to roll compel here because if we don't get this information, the adventure is over. So I think that between the two of them, they are able to get this dwarf to spill the beans. And he basically tells them, he doesn't speak common very well, so he explains in very halting, broken common, they were supposed to take delivery of some prisoners from their stronghold at the base of Kelvin's Cairn, but a blizzard blew through somewhere along the Eastway, and a bunch of the prisoners broke out and ran off. That's what he's got. So it sounds like his sister broke loose during a blizzard, and now she's just somewhere off the Eastway in Icewind Dale. You know what? This dwarf was going to kill his sister. They fully tossed this dwarf into the lake. This dwarf's a bad guy, and Karl's having none of it. He doesn't want this dwarf to come back to him and kill him in his sleep or anything. So dwarf in the water, and he sinks like a rock in his heavy metal armor. Karl and Haf head back to town. They're a little bit dispirited, but as they get back towards town, they're heading kind of past the town hall, and they see a fire burning, a really large bonfire blaze, and they're going to head over and check that out. A crowd is gathered in front of the town hall to watch the public execution of Dazan, a human wizard who, despite efforts to disguise himself, was recognized and arrested for the crimes he has inflicted upon Dale folk. He has been bound to a stake and gagged. Members of the militia use torches to light the straw tucked around his feet. Fanned by the wind, the fire catches quickly. Dazan does not struggle or scream as he is quickly engulfed in flames. Funneled up spectators move closer to the human bonfire, eager to feel its warmth. Karl and Haf actually recognized Dazan. Dazan helped them out when they were trying to find the iron ingots from the dwarves in Bryn Shander. I mean, they didn't form a bond. He wasn't a friend, but he recognized this guy. And Karl kind of asked someone like, hey, what did he do? There's a woman in a fur coat and armed with a sword that he asked, and she turns and says, he was caught killing a bunch of folk around town. And he finally got the justice he deserved. Karl nods and says, hey, do you know anything? The ferry, there are a bunch of dark dwarves that were in there. The woman looks alarmed at this. She's like, what? How do you know? Karl says, I'm looking for my sister Bridget, and the dwarves had captured her and were bringing her here. It sounds like she escaped somewhere along the Eastway, probably close to the lake. Now she's just out there somewhere. The woman nods and says, around the lake, you say? You know, 4 fishers were heading out that are pretty knowledgeable about the shoreline. They've been gone for a few days. If you would be able to look into where they went, they might be able to help you. 4 fishers went missing on Lac Denishire 10 days ago. The coastline is hard to sail along because of the ice floes, but sadly, anglers prefer it. There are fewer competing fishers from other lake towns there. We need someone to scour the coastline and search for them. First of all, we're going to mark some progress on finding his sister because he's discovered that she's not at the Easthaven ferry. She's lost somewhere along the coast, probably around the Eastway. All right, Karl takes his axe and says, I will swear to find the fishers. Hopefully they'll be able to share some information about my sister. So Karl and Haf borrow a rowboat and head out along the coast. Eventually they come upon an untended rowboat. A rowboat bobs untethered in the water amid some small ice floes, not far from the 80-foot high cliffs that abut the shoreline. One of these caves is at water level, and the others are elevated 20 to 30 feet above the frozen lake. The wind tearing through these icy caves sounds like moaning. Maybe these are the Fitchers. The rowboat matches the description. They're going to go check it out. Next time, Karl and Haf are going to explore these caves, hopefully find these knowledgeable fishermen who might be able to tell them if they've spotted a girl around the lake shore the past few days. Thanks for watching.